Now we are ready to begin to resume. We have a lot to get through today. Let's see. Some of the things we will do is drill down a bit deeper into the poem, the Erlkönig, and look at some of the poetic devices. We're going to spend most of the time looking at the text, considering rhythm, meter, in poetry, and then when we look at the music, we'll see the ways that Schubert both tries to keep some of the rhythmic aspects of the poem, but because it's a different medium, it's a musical setting of text instead of a simple poetic setting, there are all sorts of distortions in the rhythm, which is sort of interesting to look at as well. We'll also consider certain sonic effects, you might call them timbral effects, in the poem, many of which, if you're taking like a high school English class, you're sort of familiar, at least on a categorical level, like you know what alliteration is, you know what, hopefully you remember what assonance is, a few other poetic devices, things like anaphora, etc., because they play a musical role in the poem as well. And also they play a role in creating a sort of subconscious web of associations that link certain characters to certain other characters in the poem as well. So that certain names or certain pronouns, etc., sound like the names of other characters, and Goethe plays around a lot with the sounds of the German language as well. That was melodramatic, but it's good, because I'm going to get melodramatic in a second too. A few things to say about the meter in the Erlkönig. Musically, we would describe it as something like a compound meter. Wer reitet so steht, wird nach dem Wind. Das ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. It sounds like it's a kind of 12/8, perhaps, or at least some kind of compound meter. Poetically, the name for that sort of effect, if you've ever heard of poetic feet, for whatever reason, rhythmic units in poetry are called feet. The poetic feet in question here are anapests and iams. So I will talk a little bit about anapestic tetrameter. What that essentially means is there's kind of recurring rhythm of something like triplets, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which sounds sort of like a stress and then two unstressed things, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. In the Erlkönig, it sort of starts with, so what I just sang is a slightly different poetic foot. It's the opposite in the Erlkönig, because it sounds like it starts with a pickup, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But the point is that those da-da-das are called anapests. In fact, actually, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da is an anapest. The reason I call it an anapest in this poem is simply because it starts with a pickup. Wer reitet so spät, wird nach dem Wind. If you have two, it's called an iamb, and you're probably familiar with like iambic pentameter. It's a typical English poetry meter. Most of Shakespeare's plays are written in iambic pentameter. But if you were to count the number of stresses in each line of poetry in the Erlkönig, what you get is Wer reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind. That's the first line. Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. So each time it's just four, right? 4, 4, 4, 4. But each of those fours is compound. So it's either three subdivisions of the beat, in which case it's an anapest, or it's two subdivisions of the beat, in which case it's an iamb. So it actually starts with an iamb and then an anapest. Wer reitet, that's an iamb. And then tit so spät is an anapest. You don't need to know this so well. It's just for the assignment and for the lecture today, I might talk a little bit about tetrameter or other sorts of poetic meters. But the idea is simply that if you have an anapest, you've got a triple division of each beat in the poem. So you end up with something like, if it's tetrameter, then it's going to be 12/8, right? What about if it were pentameter? What would it be in musical terms? Anapestic pentameter would be what? Over there, what would a musical analog for anapestic pentameter be? Ha ha ha! You thought you knew. So what would you call it as a compound meter? Nope. Nope. Compound meter, well, 4 is 12/8. What would pentameter be? Tetrameter is 12/8. So pentameter would be 15/8, right? What about trimeter? Trimeter, which would be 3 beats in a line. 90, exactly. Yeah, so that's the basic idea. The tetrameter is telling us how many beats there are. The adjective above the meter is just telling you how many divisions in each beat there are. So anapestic, you don't have to worry now between, they're different, for each 3 or 2, they're different, it could be stressed at the beginning or stressed at the end. We don't have to worry about that now. It's just, remember, anapestic means 3, iambic means 2. And I lost my pen. I was going to write some of this on the board. I'm not sure where I misplaced my pen to. Oh well. I'll do my best without the pen. It's around here somewhere. I don't know where I dropped it. Okay, now. Oh, here it is. Okay, good. One of the things we're going to see in the Erlkönig, 3 and this is 2, divisions of 3 and 2. One of the things we're going to see in the Erlkönig is that Goethe plays around with the meter a lot, or maybe not so much, but there are a couple of very important places in the poem that he throws a wrench into the metric flow, the rhythmic flow of certain lines. And we're going to want to consider how that gives us some expressive effects in the poem. Maybe if it gives us some information about maybe like the psychological states of some of the characters, etc. But since most of you probably don't speak fluent German at a level that makes it easy to see what's going on with the original German words, I'm going to show you another poem in English that is pretty similar in style and pretty similar in mood. It's by another sort of 19th century master of Gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe, and it's also a ballad, just like the Erlkönig. The Erlkönig is also a ballad. And what you get in this poem is mostly anapestic, tetrameter, alternating with trimeter. So what you'll see is that every other line will have either 4 beats or 3 beats. I'll just show you what I mean here with the first 2 lines. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea. Right? So it's going to alternate between 4 and 3 and 4 and 3. That's a fairly typical pattern in ballads, in poetic ballads. But what I want you to pay attention to, and if you can't read the words on the screen, get it up on your own device. It is the Annabelle Lee handout assignment. What I want you to do is look for some very important places where Poe, just like Goethe, as we'll see in a moment, messes up the rhythm, messes up the nice kind of musical regular flow of the rhythm for a specific reason. A specific poetic, expressive reason. Maybe he's telling us something different from what is on the surface narrative of the poem. Maybe he is simply supporting some of the ideas in the poem with certain metrical or rhythmic effects. But I want you to pay attention to, in particular, those lines where it seems like the rhythm breaks down. The sort of metrical, regular, compound meter flow. Now, one thing also to bear in mind with any poem, poetry is typically contrapuntal. It is a contrapuntal medium, which seems maybe a little bit strange to say because there's only one person speaking at a time. There's only one word being said at a time. I'll get your question in a second. There's only one thing being said at a time, unlike a fugue where you've got like 6 instruments or whatever, or 4 instruments playing at a time. So what do I mean when I say that a poem, in fact most poems, are contrapuntal? It has something to do with what I described with the structure of a tonal answer in fugue. Remember how one of the things I said about tonal answers is that you sacrifice the rigor and the strictness of imitating the melody exactly in the dominant in order to get a sort of temporal offset, a sort of counterpoint between the entrance of the melody and the modulation, so that the modulation happens at a different point from where the imitation that should be in the key that the piece is modulating to would happen. So instead of them both coinciding, the modulation and the entrance of the new melody, they're staggered, and it creates a sort of, maybe we talked about it as predictable unpredictability, which maybe gives it a sort of natural flow where it's both recognizable as having a structure, but the structure isn't really like boxed in and really obvious. Poetry does the same sort of thing. So what we're going to see is that in addition to dividing up the lines in terms of number of beats, like the metrical beats, there are also ways of dividing up the line that create a counterpoint. One way to divide up a line, for instance, is to have sentences begin on one line and end on the next line, or perhaps end in the middle of the line. It's called enjambment. You'll see that on the list of definitions for this. Enjambment is one of these things where the length of the sentences doesn't match the length of the poetic lines. And so you get some counterpoint that way. Also, the use of certain words, certain consonants, naturally create a break at certain points. Even though you might be able to count out that there's the right number of syllables, it might be that it's just really hard to say two consonants together in order, so you naturally have to put a gap in. This sort of thing. So the use of the sounds of the words is creating another sort of rhythmic grouping. The length of the sentences, are they too short, are they too long relative to the lines? That's creating another sort of contrapuntal relationship. And then there's also the relationship of the actual meters in each line. Those moments where there aren't enough beats or there are too many beats. Okay, so in your assignment, those are the sorts of things you're going to look for. There are some fairly clear places to look for this in, say, stanzas 3 through 5, but there's a bunch of this kind of stuff throughout the poem. Okay, so I'm going to recite the poem in a very melodramatic style. Oh, actually, Ari, before I start, you had a question or a comment?
I figured it out, but if anyone can't find it, it's on the syllabus for the week, not in the actual link.
Yeah, the assignment page is simply there for you to submit it, but the assignment itself is either on the assignment page or on the musical structures in songs page. So hopefully you can all see the words.
I just wrote a session.
It's all, yeah, so anyway, hopefully you have it, right? Okay, good. All right, I should have brought some water because this is a long poem. I hope I don't get stage fright and forget the poem halfway through, but it's right up there on the board. All right, again, we're listening for these kinds of counterpoint. One, where lines have too many syllables or not enough syllables. Where sentences go too long or are too short relative to the line. And then the way that the certain various uses of the sounds of the language, the consonants, the vowels, etc., create a rhythm that is in counterpoint to the metrical rhythm of the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, here we go. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love, and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child, in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this is the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels not half so happy in heaven when envying her and me. Yes, that is the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind blew out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. I need to grow out my mutton chops and wear a gilded frock coat or something for that. But, let's point out a couple places that sort of thing happens. I mean, stanza 3, there's a really good example of this. Do you notice any places that he's playing around with the rhythm of the meter with respect to your expectation, how it breaks the flow? And how is that maybe like word painting? It's word painting even though there's no music. It's word painting with respect to the meaning of the words or the meaning of the story and the musical aspects of the poem. But where's an example of that? I'll read it. And so I'll read it in a less dramatic way and a more metrically regular way. And this was the reason that long ago. Does that sound metrical?
No.
It doesn't?
Well, it sounds wrong.
What's that?
It sounds metrical, it just sounds wrong.
Sounds metrical, it just sounds wrong. Okay, well,
You're emphasizing more of the rhythm more than, I guess you just hear the rhythm more than the words for the case, so you just da 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 da.
yeah, it's very easy to feel the rhythm there. Feel the meter. Da 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 da. And that is the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling. What about that line? What's wrong with it? Quote unquote wrong. I mean, what is different about it?
Just use it to legitimate for the next line.
But that may be the case. Let's focus on the rhythm
But
for a moment.
And it pauses to keep going.
Notice if you want to keep the pattern going, you have to pronounce it like this. A wind blew out of a cloud, chilling.
Yeah, so it
That's not how you say that word.
You pulled it out, so it's a pause there. So
Yeah, well, the stress of the word breaks the metrical regularity of the, in this case, I guess it's trimmer, right? So the fact is, you could stretch it out, or you could accent the wrong syllable. Like I could say, and that's the reason long ago, where is this? Yes, a wind blew out of a cloud. Well, actually, I don't even think I can stretch it out. A wind blew out of a cloud. You'd have to just, the thing is that to keep the metrical regularity going, I have to switch the stress. So it has to be a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling. My beautiful man. Everything else has had that stress at the end. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. The wind blew out of the cloud, chilling, my beautiful land. But that doesn't work. So the thing is that word is very carefully chosen. It's not just like, word chilling. No. Well, I mean, it is the word that he wants to use. But in addition to that, the place that he puts it in that line breaks the regularity of the meter. Why does he do that? I said it's an example of word painting. What does it do to the rhythm of that sentence, to the regularity of it? It's right there in the word. Why don't you say something? Because you're smart and you've said many good things in the past. I don't remember your name. Yeah, you're smart too. But you just go for it. How is this word painting? How is this word painting?
Okay. Give me a minute. Okay, we're here.
yeah.
How fast do you move when you're chilled?
Pretty
Like
fast.
pretty
Very fast.
Like pretty fast.
None of you have ever had hypothermia, apparently.
No. Excuse me, Professor. If you have hypothermia, I'm running to heat. I'm not waiting around. I'm
You
sprinting.
can try to run. You can try to run.
It's a good thing I've never had hypothermia.
It depends on what stage. It's true. The word painting should be kind of obvious, right? I mean, the thing is that it puts an abrupt halt So like, for instance, if we're talking about chilling the conversation, chilling the dynamic in the room, just as my awkwardness on stage has probably done multiple times in this class, it puts a halt to it, right? To chill discourse, to chill a conversation means you don't converse as fluidly anymore. There are gaps, or people, speak more carefully or more slowly or whatever. The point is, that's what the word chilling does in that sentence too. It does that with respect to the meter. It stops the meter. It's just a sudden moment of throwing a wrench in the regular kind of workings of the machinery of that meter. A wind blew out of a cloud, chilling. It doesn't work metrically. And it has built into it, because of where the stress is on that word, a pause, and just durationally it's going to stretch out the time that it takes to say that line with respect to the other ones. And so, that's a very specific choice of language there that Poe is using to break up the regularity of the poem for a specific reason, to like really make you feel that sort of shock of, I don't know, the cold air or something like that, perhaps. Let's see, Jai, and then, what's your name again? Nate, okay, so Jai, go.
I'm wondering your thoughts on, like, the idea that, to my, like, the way I've been reading it does definitely pause there, but it also, like, feels sort of like a going over the bar line phrase, like, a wind blew out of the cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee, like, it's like we're changing the starting place, or like...
Yeah, so I think one thing Penny was pointing out is that there is kind of an adjustment here, which is that the line ends with chilling, but chilling what? It sounds a little weird to just end a sentence with chilling, so it's actually chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee. Here's the problem with that analysis, however. My beautiful Annabelle Lee is metrical, and it's the pattern that we've had so far. It's the anapestic trimmer, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And so the thing is, if you're hearing chilling as part of that metrical group, then it's also too long, right? There are too many syllables if you do it that way. It's too few syllables if you connect it to the other line, because it's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but then this would be the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So it would invert it maybe, but anyway, that is very just as much a distortion of the pattern, right? Yeah. It's been 4-3, 4-3, and then you could hear it that way. The other thing about that is that this gets into the kind of microscopic level of poetic feat. This is not an iamb, it's a trochee, if that's what you're interested in knowing. Trochees have the stress on the beginning, so it's chilling, whereas iambs are on the second one. So the dut is an iamb. Trochees are da-da. And so it would be a foot in the middle of this poem that is not matched anywhere else, or at least for the most part, the regularity or pattern is not with da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So any way you look at it, there's like a wrench that's being thrown into the regularity of it. It's adding something out of place. It's breaking the flow of the rhythm. And pretty much any way that you try to analyze it, you can't really fit it into the pattern that's set up. You have to make some kind of exception by saying that one line is too short, or one line is too long, or the stress is on the wrong word, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Or actually, I think Nate.
No, you answered my question. So.
Okay.
I was going to ask more so if we're interpreting this ourselves, do you want us to focus both on musically and lyrically here, or do you want us to use, because I did a lot of poetry growing up, so I'm focused more on the stanzas and like the English terminology for it. Mm-hmm. Do you want us focusing on that there, or do you want us to just keep on the rhythm? Because like.
Well, there are very specific questions in the assignment, so just answer the questions in the assignment. I don't want to spend all day on this because I want to start talking about Puritan the way he does similar things in that poem. But I'm not asking you for like large-scale formal analyses of this. I think all of the questions are pretty much, specific to specific stanzas or specific lines. To answer your question, though. The thing with poetry, as opposed to, say, abstract music without a text or something like that, is that in addition to all the musical and metrical and rhythmic and sonic, timbral sorts of things going on with the words, they also mean something. And so it is important to consider how the meanings tie together, either in a one-to-one relationship with the music, which I think is the case of the word chilling here, or are there situations where the words seem to be in conflict with what the poetic or the musical aspect of the poem is doing?
Okay, so the follow-up question then, are we allowed to reference other poems by Edgar Allan Poe?
Nope.
Alright, cool.
We only care about this poem and the specific places in the poem that I find out in the segment. Yeah.
The thing I'm curious about is maybe how you're thinking about this differently in terms of syntax versus the way it's laid out literally in terms of the lines of the poem. The way that the punctuation sits, I think, for me at least, changes maybe the underlying structure in which I'm processing some of the rhythms. So in a way where it's it creates, how I put it, for instance, the semicolons, I think of as sort of these big beat moments.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's why I talked about poetry as being contrapuntal. Because certainly you can experience this or understand it with respect to its syntactical structure, where the sentences begin and end, where the verbs are, and where the punctuation is, and so on. And that's one completely valid and really, I think, salient aspect of how we're organizing poetry in our perception. In addition to that, there are other grouping strategies we're using, including the regularity of the meter. And so the regularity of the meter will often be in conflict with the other types of groupings, say the groupings of sentences where they begin and end, or where punctuation is, or the groupings of certain sounds, vowels, or consonants that flow easily when you pronounce them versus certain consonants or vowels put together that are hard to pronounce. Those are all different aspects of the organization of a poem that are in counterpoint with each other. So you're absolutely right that there are different ways to read it, and the best sort of, or maybe the fullest sort of way of reading a poem is to understand that those things are all contributing to the counterpoint of the poem at a larger level, right? So that, the punctuation doesn't line up all the time with the ends of sentences, and thank God it doesn't, because then you have a really dumb poem. It would be very sing-songy, and there would be no sort of ambiguity or no room for interpretation, for meaning, or for the structures of sentences and so on. It's precisely because there are multiple different ways of experiencing the organization at the same time. The metrical, the syntactical, that is how long sentences are, how they're structured, the sonic or timbral, what letters come together or don't come together, or what sorts of patterns you might find with alliteration or beginning lines the same way, and this kind of thing. Certainly rhyme is also an aspect of this, how the rhyme scheme works. In this poem, there's a lot of internal rhyme, and sometimes the internal rhyme creates this strong sense of flow, sometimes it breaks the sense of flow. And so all of these things are working together in counterpoint. Even though there's only technically one sound happening at a time, there's only one person speaking, the different sort of organizational principles, the organization of the sentences, the organization of the punctuation, the organization of the rhythm are all in counterpoint with each other. Okay, is that clear? I want to move on because I don't want to run out of time, even though this is very fascinating. Because Goethe is doing something very similar in the Erlkönig. In the case of Goethe, unlike the example that I looked at here just now, Goethe does something really interesting where he kind of messes up the flow of a line or a couple lines in a way that is in conflict with what the lines are saying in terms of what the words mean. So sometimes there are certain lines that say one thing in terms of what the words mean, but musically something else is going on. I want to draw your attention to just one place like this in the poem. Let me get that down, get this up here. Okay, so most of the time in the Erlkönig, we've got this kind of meter going. Da, 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 da. Wer reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind, es ist der Vater den Sein und Wind. Hält den Knaben wollen den Arm, fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn warm. It's just, very sing-songy, very, folk song-like, ballad-like. I want to draw your attention to, let's see, where should we begin? Let's just focus in right now on stanza 4. Stanza 4, that's this one here. So it's after the Erlkönig has spoken once, and the Erlkönig is very regular. Du liebes Kind, komm geh mit mir, gar schöne Spiele spiel ich mit dir. Manch bunte Blumen sind an dem Stand, meine Mutter hat manch gülden Gewand. So it almost sounds kind of dumb, right? It's like, not only is the rhythm really regular, but, many times, if you look at the punctuation to Jai's point, the punctuation comes at the end of each line, right? The first line is a full sentence, then you get a semicolon, so it's, this could act as a sentence. Gar schöne Spiele spiele ich mit dir, syntactically, that's a full sentence. Manch bunte Blumen sind an dem Stand, that's a full sentence. It's extremely regular and extremely grounded, right? It's like it feels very stable, very certain. It doesn't sound confused or, frightened or anxious. Let's look at the next stanza, though. This is where the son starts speaking, and then the father responds. So the son says, my father, and don't you hear what the elf king quietly promises me? And then the father says, be calm, stay calm, my child. The wind is rustling through the withered leaves. The English doesn't respect the rhythm, so I'm going to say it in German. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? Sorry, I'll do it one more time. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? There's one very interesting thing about that. First of all, is it metrically regular or not? Yeah. But how is it possible to do that? Notice the name that the kid gives to the monster here. It's different than the title of the poem, isn't it? Erlkönig. He has to add a syllable. Why does he add a syllable? To make the line count work out, to make the meter, right? So if it were, mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht, that feels wrong. Whereas if I add the extra syllable, mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht. See how adding that syllable maintains the line, but it changes the name. It's like the eponymous name of the monster. The title of the poem is Erlkönig, not Erlkönig. Erlkönig is there to maintain the regularity of the meter. Look at how the father responds. I'm going to read the whole thing so you can get a sense of this. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind. In distant Blättern säuselt der Wind. What about that third line? What's going on with that third line? So here we go. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? Fours and fours. Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind. In dünneren Blättern säuselt der Wind. So the fourth line of the father is metrical and it has the 4 beats. But the third line?
There's a beat taken off.
Yeah, well, for one thing, it's tremor, not tetrameter. Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind. I'll do this in English so you get a sense of it. Stay peaceful, remain peaceful, my child, is the same syllabic count. Stay peaceful, remain peaceful, my child. So there are only 3. Now, if I wanted to stretch it out, I could potentially do that. I could say, let's see. Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind. Be peaceful, remain peaceful, my child. So I could stretch out that first group here on the ruhig, sei ruhig, be peaceful. But what happens if I do that? Be peaceful, remain peaceful, my child. The stress is on the wrong syllable. So there isn't a way to quote unquote fix that line, to fit it into the meter so that it continues the pattern. There's something wrong with that line with respect to just the regularity of the flow, the kind of folk song-like flow of that line. But notice what's going on. A couple things. First of all, the son if he would have said the right name, Erlkönig, instead of Erlkönig, would have had the same problem. But the son is a little bit more attuned to the situation, so the son adds the syllable. So you can sort of imagine that there's like a rock on the ground, they're running along, and was Erlkönig mit Eisen verspricht. I see the rock, I add a syllable, the continuity goes on. Whereas the father, following that, fails to do that. Has too few syllables, and then you get sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind. Not only are there only 3 syllables, but the feet are different as well. We don't have to spend time on that. But the point being that the son is more attuned to the situation. We see that by virtue of the fact that the line is changed, the name is changed in order to maintain the flow. Whereas the father doesn't recognize that, I guess, and has this sort of clumsy, non-flowing, just sort of blocky sounding rhythm in his line. But what is he saying there? What is he saying? Be calm, stay calm, my child. How calm does that break in the meter sound? If you're la 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 la. Not calm, exactly right. So essentially this is like a performative contradiction. What the father is saying is everything's great, but the way he's saying it is not great. The way he's saying it is falling all over itself. It's not in control. Notice that the son is in control of the meter by adding a syllable. The father isn't, even though the father thinks he's in control of the situation by telling his son there's nothing out there. Right? And so it's sort of like if I were to say, I'm not shouting! What would you say with respect to maybe this polarity down here, reason and feeling, if someone tried to convince you that they weren't angry by saying, I'm not shouting? Notice that on a purely rational level, the sentence, I'm not shouting, is not contradictory. The contradiction is in the difference between what you're saying and how you're saying it. Shouting, I'm not shouting, is contradictory because I'm not in touch with maybe like the emotional aspect, the how I'm saying it of that sentence. Right? There's a sense in which, in saying, be calm, stay calm, the father, even though he thinks he's being rational, is not sufficiently attuned to the situation, to his own feeling, maybe his own fear, his own sense of instability, something like that. And so he puts this mask on of being calm, but then the poetry gives away the fact that he's not in control, right? But it also gives us a sense of maybe this sort of polarity between reason and feeling. Maybe if, like the son here, a little bit more attuned to his feeling, to the sort of sense of calmness or the sense of maybe even, there's a kind of energy or flow or happiness in the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but when you have this really blocky, kind of distorted rhythm, you lose that. And yet at the same time, that contradicts what the father is saying on the surface level of what the words mean. 10 minutes, okay. There's one other place that is sort of interesting. I think it's here. Yeah. Okay, so if you remember, in this poem, the dialogue goes back and forth, but of course in the beginning, the second stanza matches the structure of the whole thing. It's like an ABA, narration, dialogue, narration. We get the ABA here, father, father, son, father. And that dialogue interacting with the Erlkönig continues until we're down here, and then suddenly the Erlkönig pushes out the father and jumps into the stanza with the son, grabs the son, kills him, does whatever, I don't know, does something horrible to him. But notice how many syllables you get here. Ich liebe dich, mich weiß deine schöne Gestalt. What do you get? It's right here. Oh. Yes. It's pentameter. Isn't that interesting? In addition to breaking into the stanza with the son and pushing out the father, it's like a zero-sum game between the father and the Erlkönig. There are only 2 lines in this whole poem that don't match the tetrameter, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's that line of the Father where you only have 3, and that line of the Erlkönig where you have 5. And so it's like the Erlkönig has taken over the lost feet from the Father. At that moment that he pushes out the Father, or becomes the Father, or whatever have you, in that stanza, right? And so it's this sort of use of metrical irregularity that is then sort of taken over by the Erlkönig when he assumes the form of the Father, grabs the kid, and goes on. There are a couple other places that might suggest that there are other connections between the Father and the Erlkönig. If you look at where there are a bunch of places like this. I'm only going to look at the narration sections. If you look at the use of alliteration and the use of anaphora is just where you start lines the same way. So you start with the same word, maybe successive lines, you start with the same word, and it gives a sort of pattern that way. How is the first sort of monogram of the Erlkönig used in terms of alliteration in those narration sections? Look at this. Wer reitet so spät just nach dem Wind? Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind, and then hat den Knaben erfasst. So we get this If you look at the bottom one, den Vater gausitz, and then starting here, reitet geschwind, hält in Armen das ächzende Kind, reicht den Hof mit Mühe und Not. You get all that Erlkönig, right? It's like, he's talking about, the narrator's talking about the Father, but with the use of the alliteration and the anaphora, he's also connecting it sonically to the name of the monster, right? So that that's another sort of subtle device, and there are a few other examples of that elsewhere. But that's one other sort of thing that a poem might do to create a sort of subtext of meaning, subtext of associations or feelings, expressivity, and so on. I think maybe the last thing I'll spend time on today is to come back to this idea of polarities, and maybe we'll spend a little bit of time with this on Tuesday. It's our last day to look at the Erlkönig, and we'll look at the music in more depth. I said before that Goethe, in addition to being a poet, was also a scientist of sorts. He had a sort of unconventional view on science. He thought that science of his day, I suppose the main science being Newtonian physics, didn't have a good enough explanation for how life is possible. Because what Newtonian physics basically does is look at the universe as dead matter being moved around by forces being basically timeless, eternal laws, generalities of nature. And in that view, it's very hard to figure out how anything could ever change, how anything could ever become alive or grow, or, for instance, heal itself if it's cut, and this kind of thing. And so he developed an approach to science that was around the unity of polarities, or the unity of opposites. This idea that for something to grow and change, it has to constantly be like a unity of both being a thing and then not being the thing that it is starting to become, and gradually moving from one status to another status. It's this sort of alternation, or this unity of perhaps being and not being in the interest of becoming something new. But I want to show you one particularly interesting example of this from his 1810 work, The Science of Color. It has to do with light and darkness. Because in the Erlkönig, that is one of the main polarities, right? I mean, what is the Father's tragic flaw? He's not sufficiently attuned to the darkness. He doesn't think there's anything in the shadows. He thinks shadow is just nothing. It's just the absence of light. All you need is light, and then you'll know everything. What he doesn't realize is that darkness is its own force as well. And in the theory of colors, I put some documentaries which you could watch. They're actually pretty nice and fairly poetic. These documentaries up here. The first one is a Swedish physicist who does some color experiments using Goethe's experimental setup, and then this other one, Light, Darkness, and Colors, is a more sort of artistic documentary about color, darkness, and light. But with respect to the way that this idea of what light is, the way that the interactions of opposites actually are what constitute reality, according to Goethe, and the way that that plays a role in this poem. If you know anything about Isaac Newton's optics, essentially what Isaac Newton does is he wants to give more or less an atomic analysis of what light is. And so what he does is he has this dark room, presumably thinking that darkness is like a neutral canvas within which he can then study light by separating it into its constituent colors. And so he darkens the room, has this little hole in the wall, and the light comes through, he passes it through a prism, and sees that there are predominantly 3 colors, red, green, and blue, in the spectrum. And so on the Newtonian view of color and light, darkness is completely neutral. The only thing that really has structure to it is light, and it's possible to simply separate light, to analyze it, to cut it up into its constituent elements. What Goethe does kind of brilliantly in around 1810, it's when the theory of colors is published, is do essentially just the opposite experiment. So above here, this is what it looks like in a lithograph, I suppose. This is Newton. This is the little beam of light coming through the prism and being separated into its spectrum. Here we can see it. This is an illustration from Goethe's theory of colors. So the darkness here, you see that is like a dark room, and then there's a little slit of light that comes through and can be separated into the Newton spectrum. What Goethe does is instead of that, he sets up a room that has a really bright light source and just puts a very, very thin obstruction in front of the light source so that you get a tiny shadow. And what he realizes is that he gets an inverted spectrum. He gets a different spectrum from what Newton has. And one other sort of way of looking at this is that he also starts to see that where you have the darkness and the light, there are colors that show up on the boundaries. From all of this experimentation, he essentially comes up with the idea that color isn't something you get by separating light into its constituent elements. Color only arises in the interplay of light and shadow. That what is true reality, physical reality, things like color, it's not that it's something that exists on its own. It is something that only is possible, only arises when polarities like light and darkness come into some kind of unity. That color is the unity of light and darkness. Light and darkness are opposites. Color is the unity of those things. And Newton, just like the father in the Erlkönig, is not sufficiently attuned to darkness. He thinks darkness is nothing. It's just neutral. But what Goethe wants to say is reality has to take account both of things like reason, things like the light, and darkness. That darkness is also its own sort of universe, its own, it has its own structures and its own sorts of things. And so I suppose the tragedy of the Erlkönig is simply that the father is too rational, thinks that he can just explain away darkness by filling it with light, and not understanding that darkness is its own universe that is constantly in interaction with the world of light. That's where I'm going to leave it today. We'll maybe say a few more words about this in review, and then we'll look at Schubert's setting of the Erlkönig on Tuesday. All right, see you all.